But the first question is, in many ways, the hardest to answer. How can we grow this field of scholars of basic writing at a time like this, where we're not in 1969 anymore, at the time of hope and open admissions and concern for social justice. We're in this time of polarization, of great wealth, where it's not just the 1%, but like the 100th of 1% has a huge amount of the money of the country, and where the concerns for those at the bottom of the social hierarchy are not a very big, are not very often a matter of concern politically. And legislators are getting involved in phasing out programs all over the country. So it's a time, as basic writing often is under attack, but I think it's a very bad time in the political sense for the opportunity.
So those of us who have been here for 40 years or more have seen quite an arc of change in the position of basic writing. So I started out there in 1971 with a new PhD, and the conditions for being a basic writing teacher in 1971 could not be more ideal for someone who was young and inspired by the task. So in a way, we didn't find it daunting that the people who were coming to CUNY for a college degree had been among the poorest educated in New York City, and that only made it more inspiring. It gave people in their 20s something very consequential to do.
However, I do think that there's still a tremendous interest in this field. The interest came out to me, especially at the Four Cs in 2011, when Hope and I and various other people from CUNY were at the Conference on Basic Writing, the CBW, who gave us these questions, the one-day workshop that they always have before Four Cs. And it was brought up that day that basic writing was becoming almost invisible at the conference, that there were very few presentations with that word in the title, and that there wasn't special interest group and that sort of thing. And so the leaders who were in the room drafted a petition to get more support for basic writing, and circulated it right then and there. I'm sure Liz Clark was one of them. She's very good at getting the word out quickly electronically. And immediately this petition was signed by many of the leaders in the field of composition. And then the next conference in 2012, there was a tremendous resurgence of presentations having to do with basic writing, having that word in the title. And Bruce Horner was invited to give the keynote speech at the CBW one-day workshop. Also Mike Rose, who's been so influential in the field from the beginning and up until today, received the Four Cs Exemplar Award and standing ovation. So 2012 was a great year for basic writing at the conference. So it shows that there's still this interest in the scholarship of basic writing, even as programs are being demolished. So I think that's what, if we have a dream to grow the field and to keep the interest in this field, that's the kind of energy that we need to tap into. And I really like the point that he made in this talk, which is that many of the most important ideas, and now I'm looking at Sandra and thinking of her early work, many of the most important ideas in the field of composition and rhetoric since the early and mid-1970s have emerged through the basic writing scholarship. Many of these people, as George brought out in the book, are now no longer considered or affiliated with basic writing, people like Andrea Lunsford and many, many others. But that's where they started, and I think there is something about the concern with basic writers that is very generative. I think that Karen Pitt and I were talking about this recently. The conflict and struggle that you find in a basic writing course causes you to see things that you might not see in a course where things are running more on an even keel. But it only happens if the teacher is part of the conflict and struggle as well, I think. And so I think it's a wonderful site for research. And Bruce Horner brought that out. I'm just going to read one short quote from his talk that was then published. his title was Relocating Basic Writing. In the strategy that he's talking about, the word basic does not represent simple, but rather fundamental and profound, the site for open inquiry as in the basic research in which scientists engage. It is possible, in other words, to understand the peripheral location of basic writing and basic writers as, in fact, not the site for preliminaries, but rather leading-edge work addressing the most fundamental questions about literacy and its learning. And I think that I accept that. I think it has been a real site for learning about writing and all that it entails. Just to end up by saying that he mentions in this piece, and then there's another piece on the bibliography I passed around by Min-Jen Liu and Bruce Horner about their theories that they're developing with other scholars of translingualism. And I find this very generative and a new direction, not entirely new, but a productive direction for BW scholarship. And so even if you're not affiliated primarily with the field of basic writing, I think that there's room for new scholars and new scholarship that relates to these concerns. So I hope that we will grow the field.
I want to put on the table first is that we know what to do in the classroom. We may be allowed to do it. We may not be allowed to do it. Okay, but at this point, it's not 1971. We are very rich in a professional history, so we know what to do. We know what works. So who is stopping us from doing what works, right? So if the question is posed that way, then we have to really discuss it. We have to discuss the problem differently. That is, the power to do what works was lost in a very prolonged battle with the authorities all through the 1970s and the 1980s. So probably it will take another prolonged battle with the authorities to recover it.